Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges. I'm your host, Sarah Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. This podcast will not only shed light on mental health issues, but will also reveal the intersection between faith and mental illness. I pray that these themes will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today I am joined by special guest JaQuasia Vandross. JaQuasia Vandross is the founding CEO and president of the Black Girls Can Heal Incorporation. She is an advocate for health, wellness, and healing. JaQuasia brings a holistic approach to her work by integrating spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional forms of well-being. JaQuasia brings more than a decade of passion, dedication, and experience in serving communities of color with a keen focus on elevating women and girls' voices, promoting mental health awareness, and addressing healing. JaQuasia currently serves as a clinical coordinator, providing underserved youth and families in the community and foster care with affordable mental health therapy services. She is a 2016 Mercy College graduate with a BS in psychology and a 2020 Mercy College graduate with an MS in clinical mental health counseling with certification in alcoholism and substance abuse. Under her leadership, the Black Girls Can Heal Incorporation research and advocacy will demonstrate the importance of education, healing, and mental health among women and girls of color. Welcome, JaQuasia.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So I want to get to know you a little bit better. So what are 3 things that you are most passionate about and why?
I want to say the first thing is education. I'm very passionate about education, hence me being in school, getting a doctorate after, spending multiple years in school prior. I think education is important, especially for people of color. It's something that people cannot take away from us. They can take, the jewelry, the clothes, the sneakers, the phones, the computers. They can take all of that away from us, but they can't take our education from us. And once we know something, we know it. Yeah. So that's something that I'm very passionate about. I'm also passionate about community. I feel that together we can accomplish a lot. I don't think that any one of us was meant to journey alone. I think understanding that there are other people out there who are going through similar things as you lightens the load. So I am definitely passionate about community. And I'm passionate about, the last thing I'm passionate about is, I would have to say, loyalty. Being loyal. If you say you mean something to someone, try to uphold what it is that you're saying. Nobody is obligated to do anything for anyone. Right. But if you state that you're going to do something, if you state that you're going to be that person to someone, then try your hardest too.
Yeah, no, I actually resonate with that point because it's so important to be consistent because that's how you show your loyalty to other people, And I love what you said about community and education. It's just that knowledge that you learn, like you said, nobody can take that away from you. And that is something that's really important. And community, of course, is very valuable in terms of even beyond dealing with mental health. You just need that community because we're not meant to do this life alone. So Those are very great points.
Thank you.
So what is your experience with mental health?
So, in regards to me working with individuals who have mental health, or just my own particular experience with mental health?
You could do both if you want.
So my personal experience with mental health is just a lot of anxiety, which stemmed from attachment issues that I've had, abandonment issues that I've had. I was adopted. So in my early adulthood and my teenage years, I struggled with identity. I struggled with abandonment issues. I struggled with attachment issues, which brought on anxiety. Just the constant not knowing what's going to happen and not being able to control what's going to happen, especially when it came down to relationships, whether they were romantic or platonic, not being able to control whether that person will stay or leave, despite whatever actions I take to keep them here. So it was just a lot of anxiety that I struggled with throughout my teenage years and early adulthood. In regards to working with individuals who have mental illnesses, I work with children and adolescents, and I work in an adoption agency. So I see a lot of children who mirror back the same exact things that I was struggling with at that particular age.
Right.
So
yeah, I love how your journey just comes full circle. Like,
right.
The things that you've been dealing with, as well as, like, the people that you help now. Like, that is just such a beautiful testament of how you could just take your pain and your past and, you know, do it for purpose. So I love that. That is good. How did you decide to start Black Girls Can Heal Incorporated? And what was the most influential factor in making that decision?
So I started Black Girls Can Heal because I was searching for something similar when I was a young adult. I was searching for something similar when I was a teenager. I was searching for a space where there were other girls, there were other young women who were experiencing the feelings that I was experiencing. You know, having someone to talk to where there wasn't any bias, there wasn't any judgment. I was just able to show up as my whole self at that particular time. So because I never found a place like that, I decided to create one so that there are not other teenagers and young women and adult women who are wandering aimlessly, directionless, and not being able to find their clique, their community.
Right.
So I wanted to give what I was looking for.
Wow, I love that. I really love that. And it's just like, I love your initiative too. You're just like, well, I don't see one, I'm gonna start one. So
right.
like, that is so good. And I wish, like, you know, more people would have, like, the boldness to, you know, step out, because I'm sure it wasn't an easy thing, you know?
Oh no.
Yeah, like, especially being vulnerable and, like, you know, going out there and starting something for people, especially, like, women of color, because a lot of the times we're taught to, like, shoulder these burdens by ourselves, and we're taught to be strong Black women, and we kind of fall into that stereotype. And it's just like, you know, I love how you create a community where Black women can heal from past traumas, because we don't see a lot of that in, you know, the mental health community nowadays. So thank you so much for doing that.
Of course.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about mental health and relationships. And so what would you say are some fundamental characteristics of a good relationship?
So right off the bat, I'm going to say communication. Yep. Because there is literally no relationship that can survive without communication. So whether that's a familial relationship, platonic, romantic, even a working environment relationship, communication is necessary. You can't walk around thinking or have the assumption that people can read your mind.
Right.
We don't know when you're mad. We don't know when you're sad. We don't know when you're angry or disappointed unless you voice it.
Right.
So that's definitely one of the most important characteristics when it comes down to a good relationship. And then my next one would be trust. And that also is true in whatever relationship that you have. You want to be able to trust the person that you're romantically involved with. You want to be able to trust your friend. You want to be able to trust your coworker. You want to be able to trust your family members. Those are important. And trust is also a two-way street. You can't expect people to trust you and you not reciprocate that back.
Right, right.
Another one would have to be being able to be vulnerable. You know, a lot of times we avoid having those hard conversations, and that actually is what tears the relationship apart.
Right.
Because we're so afraid to be vulnerable and actually express how we feel about something that was done in the relationship. So those will be the three things that, you know, I hold dear. Those are the three things that I talk about a lot: vulnerability, communication, and trust.
Yeah, those are so interconnected. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like you can't have one without the other. Like you can't expect to fully trust somebody if they're not going to be vulnerable and communicate, you know? So like I love those characteristics that you brought up because they're just so important, especially
Right.
if you like want to progress in your relationships and create that bond that you have with somebody. And these can span over the course of like any type of relationship, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad that you brought up those characteristics because those are very important. So in your work with the youth and in the mental health sphere, what are some common patterns that you see in terms of them engaging in relationships?
It's very similar, and people might not agree with this, but whether you're a teenager, adolescent, or an adult, you see very similar patterns. And a lot of it has to do with some type of childhood trauma that you may have experienced. So that's why the patterns look very similar, but a lot of it is very similar. So I wouldn't actually break them up into different categories because they're so similar. You see people, again, struggling with being vulnerable. You see people struggling or fighting for attention, and that can stem back to the fact that as a child they didn't get attention.
Right.
So it's projecting into their adulthood where they're seeking partners out that'll give them attention. No matter what it is that they have to do, they're going to do it so they can get that attention. Whether it's positive attention, whether it's negative attention, it's still attention.
Right.
Then you have people who were fixers as children. They were their parents' therapist. They were their parents' mediator. You know, so fast forward into your adulthood, that's projecting off into your adulthood as a fixer. You're going out and looking for people that you can fix.
Yeah.
You know, so a lot of it stems from our childhood and the trauma that we may have experienced in our childhood. And those patterns follow us into our adulthood, especially if we're not willing to do the work to heal that trauma.
Right, right. And I'm glad that you said that they are, like, there's some overlap with, like, the youth and adulthood, because it carries over into adulthood. And a lot of the times it's like, you know, people see things in younger people and they kind of act like they don't have the same issues, and it's just like, come on, man. Like, like, don't just, like, isolate them and be like, oh, it's just a teenage issue, or it's just a phase. Like, no, it carries on into adulthood. So I'm glad you made that distinction. And something else that you said that kind of, you know, highlighted something important to me was that, you know, it's like different patterns that you develop during childhood trauma. So it's like the examples that you gave, like being a fixer or seeking attention, or even like certain attachment styles that you develop during like your childhood moments. Like those could really like leave such an imprint on you that you develop those patterns, and most of those patterns are very hard to break, like especially if you don't get like the proper therapy or the proper, you know, coaching and, you know, lifestyle changes that you make later on. So I also have another question in addition to that. So what advice would you give in terms of like somebody who's trying to break those patterns but doesn't know where to start? Like, where can they start to break those patterns?
With breaking any generational cycle, any generational curse, any generational pattern, you have to start with acknowledgement. You can't heal something that you have yet to acknowledge. You have to be able to say, this is a problem and why it is a problem. And once you come to terms with this behavior being a problem, then you can start seeking out help.
Right.
And your help may look different from someone else's help. Someone else may say, I'm going to therapy. But that may not be for you yet. You may not be at that point in your journey where you want to seek therapy. So you may find alternatives like journaling or poetry writing or art therapy, you know, something that works for you. But it all starts with acknowledging. You can't fix anything. You can't heal from anything if you don't acknowledge that it's a problem.
Right. No, I totally agree with that. And it's just like, it takes a lot to admit that you have an issue. Like, a lot of the times it's like you're in denial and you don't see it as an issue. And you're just thinking to yourself, oh, I don't have a problem. Like, like I don't have to go to therapy. Or some people are very turned off to therapy because they think it's just going to be like, kind of like open heart surgery where all of your stuff is like out there in the open and then you have to contend with all these different things. But, if you, like you said, it could be different for different people. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's very important.
Yeah. And a lot of it too, it may not be denial, it may be normalized. A lot of behaviors that we do have, because we've had these behaviors since we were children, they become normalized. And we can't see that there's something actually wrong with these behaviors because we're so accustomed to them. So you know how you hear people say, that happened to me as a child, or my parent did this to me as a child and I turned out fine. And they're doing the same behaviors to their children because they turned out fine, quote unquote, So a lot of it is normalized, and we have to wake up to those patterns. But
yeah, no, definitely, especially with, it's a little bit harder with the older generations because like you said, they would it's like they don't really see it as an issue, like things that because nowadays we're more open to like mental health and like getting therapy and like going through the healing process. But like with older generations, and I would say like my parents, for example, they're like it took them a little bit longer to like get used to the fact that I was going to therapy, because they were just like, why do you need therapy? Like, like it's for, people that are on the other side of the spectrum that actually need a little more help than you do. But like, no, it's just a simple fact that, like you said, it's normalized. And so they think that it isn't an issue, but then bringing these things to light is also important because it shows that, hey, like this is a problem and it's something that I want to change to better myself in the future.
Right.
Yeah, so that's really good. Just a little segue here. So what are some ways that we can strengthen our relationships even though we or other people may deal with mental illness?
So ways that we can strengthen our relationship with individuals who have a mental illness?
Yeah, or if we have, like, let's say you have a mental illness, like how can you strengthen your relationships with other people? Or how can, a little bit of both. Like how can you strengthen your relationship if you have a mental illness, and then how can you strengthen relationships with those who have mental illnesses?
So if me personally, if I had a mental illness and I wanted to strengthen a particular relationship, again, vulnerability, letting people know first and foremost that I do have this mental illness. And if it's like a personality disorder where my moods may shift, I want to be as transparent and as vulnerable as I can be with these individuals, letting them know there are going to be some days that are good and there are going to be some days that are bad. There are going to be some days where I want to speak and there are going to be some days where I don't want to talk to you at all. And depending on the people who you are relaying this information to, they'll understand it and they'll be receptive to it, and they will give you your space when needed. And it's not much more to it. You have to make sure that you surround yourself with people who are understanding, people who are going to get that there are going to be good days and there are going to be bad days. And they respect you, and they don't try to make you feel bad or shame you for what it is that you are going through internally, things that you have no control over as well.
Right.
If you're dealing with someone who has a mental illness, you want to give them that same respect as well. That same respect, that same understanding that there are going to be good days, there are going to be bad days. And on those bad days, where you may not know if the person may not voice it, but, give them their space, be understanding, don't be too overbearing, don't shame them for it. It's just that old saying, treat people how you would like to be treated. So that would be my advice. Just be understanding on both ends and be as transparent and as vulnerable as you can be. If you think that you can't deal with someone who has mental illness, then say that.
Right.
If you need something more consistent, if we're talking about like a romantic relationship, say that you need something more consistent. You can't deal with someone who is on and off, but you have to voice these things. You have to be vulnerable, you have to communicate, you have to be transparent.
Right. No, that's very true. Like, vulnerability is like a key component in that. And I love what you said about not being overbearing and not shaming people for something that they can't control, because a lot of the times it's like some people say things but they don't know what to say in the given moment, and so it might be misconstrued as like being rude or being like shameful, but it's really something that you have to kind of work on in terms of like gaining that understanding. And also, I love what you said about being open with communication, like especially if you have a mental illness, like try to not like super like go hard on the education part, but just try to like because you can like overeducate and overstimulate people too. Like that's a whole nother issue for another day. But yeah, but just tell people what your triggers are, because a thing that I found helpful, especially with my family members and getting them to understand what bipolar disorder is all about, is telling them what my triggers are, like what sets me off, or what can possibly, like, you may be well-meaning when you say this certain phrase, but I'll take it this way because it's a trigger of mine, so. And I love what you said about open communication, because that's crucial in terms of like strengthening your relationships.
Right. On both ends.
Yeah. So boundaries are important in terms of like setting the parameters of like what you can and cannot do in terms of like a relationship. So what are some important boundaries to set up in a relationship, especially in dealing with mental health issues?
So one of the most important boundaries, and I can't stress this enough, is being able to say no without over explaining yourself. So if you're not feeling up to going out, I know with certain mental illnesses, you just don't want to interact with people. You don't want to have full-blown communication with people, conversations with people.
Right.
So you have the right to say no without over-explaining yourself. And your partner, your friends, your family should be able to understand that through open communication. So yes, being able to say no. And to reiterate, there are multiple types of boundaries that you can have. You can have personal boundaries. You can have professional boundaries. You can have time boundaries. It's multiple boundaries that you can have. Another boundary that I would say to create for someone who has a mental health illness is time too. I know for me, I put my phone on do not disturb at 10 o'clock. So after 10, I'm not getting your text messages, I'm not getting your phone calls, I'm not getting your emails, because my phone is on do not disturb. That is important. That is also an important boundary for individuals who have mental health illnesses. Time, creating a schedule. When you're going to be able to do this, having some type of consistency. When you do this, when you do that, so you don't feel overwhelmed, so you don't feel burdened. Right. I know with like anxiety, just my personal experience, when I feel overwhelmed, I start to shut down. So it's important for me to have my calendar with what I'm supposed to do today, who I'm supposed to meet with today. Even if I'm going out to hang out with friends, it's in my calendar. And I know for some people that's a little excessive, but not for me. I don't like feeling overwhelmed, because I know being overwhelmed is a trigger.
Right.
So those are two important boundaries for me, just focusing on your time management and being able to just say no without over explaining yourself, because that is even triggering. You get overwhelmed with having to explain yourself no, because by the time you finish, you frustrated because you have to go through a whole essay to support why you're saying no.
Right.
When in reality, you are entitled to saying no,
Yeah. That's really good. And I love the, like, not over explaining. because I have a bad habit. I'll be honest. I have a bad habit of just like overcompensating for the fact that I said no. And then, my friends are just like, you didn't have to say all that. No would have been fine. Like, so like, yeah, because a lot of the times it's hard. It's really hard to like say no, especially when you're dealing with situations that you feel like you have to say yes all the time, and it's also important to like, yeah, your time is valuable. And so like setting a schedule, like you said, at 10 o'clock, like that's the cutoff point. You're going on Do Not Disturb, like, so you can have that peace of mind. So that's really important. And that's a tactic I am definitely going to pick up. But yeah, that's amazing. And so, JaQuasia, my final question for you today would be, what advice or words of encouragement do you have for those who struggle with mental health issues and relationships?
So I just want to, again, reiterate how important it is to have open communication and how important it is to be transparent and how important it is to be vulnerable. If we're talking about romantic relationships, it is important to, like you said, you don't want to like give a whole lecture on the particular mental illness, but you want to let them know about your specific triggers, what bothers you. You want to let them know that there are going to be days where I'm 100%, and there are going to be days where I'm 50%, and then there are going to be days where I'm 10%. All of this happens through open communication, and you have to be transparent. You cannot walk around thinking that your partner is going to know what's going on if you don't voice it. That is important. And that is important in every relationship, whether it's with a family member, whether it's with a friend, whether you're at work. And none of us are mind readers, and we're not going to know how you're feeling if you don't voice that to us. We're not going to know that you have a mental illness unless you let us know. And that is also you. That's also you being vulnerable. You don't have to walk around and tell people, hey, hi, my name is X, Y, and Z, and I have anxiety. You don't have to let them know that. But if you want people to be more understanding or more compassionate, then these are things that you have to talk about. And we have to get into a space where we start having these conversations. They're hard conversations, but we have to move towards having them.
Right. No, I definitely agree with that. That's very important. And like you said, you can't be like an open book to everybody, because complete strangers are not gonna, want to know all your business.
Right.
But just have like vulnerability in terms of like, being wise about who you be vulnerable with. That's very important. Well, JaQuasia, I thank you so much for joining me today. And I want to thank you again. And if you guys want, you can check her out. She's on Instagram. And I will leave all the descriptions and links that you can find her at in the show notes. And I hope that you guys stick around for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to Rough Edges. Feel free to follow this podcast on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast or visit my blog at sarahifox.com. If you have any questions or further suggestions on how to make this podcast grow, you can email at rough.edges.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.